Welcome to the Mind Body Strength Nerds podcast with Dr. Scotty Butcher, a licensed physiotherapist with a PhD in physiology. This podcast is for people with mind-body, psychophysiologic, or neuroplastic conditions, and for the practitioners who help them. NERD stands for Neuroplasticity and Emotional Recovery Discussions and Stories. Are you ready? Let's fucking go. What's up, nerds? Welcome to the absolute first episode of the Mind Body Strength Nerds podcast. NERD stands for Neuroplasticity and Emotional Recovery Discussions and Stories. I'm so happy to be here. This is raw. This is unfiltered. I'm not even going to edit these. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a blast. There's going to be some swears. There's going to be some laughs. I think there's going to be some crying, and there's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of learning. And that's the plan. I'm going to call this first episode, What the Fuck is Wrong with Me? Or WTF is wrong with me. That WTF is something that I actually talk about quite a bit. It's called working through fear, which honestly, when we're talking about emotions, when we're talking about neuroplasticity, fear is one of the primary targets of things that we work with. And that's what you're going to see over time with this podcast. This is a common theme as we go through. So I'm Scotty Butcher. I'll give a bit of an introduction, but I really want to talk mostly today about how my life story has led me through this work. And I'm kind of thinking this is my real story. This isn't the bio version. This is the nitty gritty, everything that happened, all the fuck ups, all the bullshit, all the everything. And I'm going to be real with you. I'm going to be raw. And hopefully everyone that listens to this can get something out of it, something that maybe resonates with them, whether you're someone who has chronic symptoms, chronic pain, or long COVID, or fatigue, or brain fog, or IBS, or migraines, or fibromyalgia, or you name it. It probably applies to you in some way, shape, or form. So I want to dig into this. And, it might sound familiar, but it's the feeling around it. It's not necessarily the story itself, because mine's unique, and just like yours is going to be unique. And so through the course of this podcast, what I want to do is I want to highlight a lot of these unique stories, not just from clients, but what we're going to hear from is practitioners as well. So there's going to be a nice blend of hearing people's stories that have gone through this work, but also people that are doing the work on a daily basis. And so this is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's work that I am very proud of. It's a work that I think has really transformed my career, my outlook on not only professionalism, but also my life personally. It affects my family. It affects my life. It affects everything. All right. So what I see in individuals a sense of really this fear, and that people are trying to get rid of symptoms. That is such a common theme in everything that I see. And it makes sense, right? Symptoms are negative, or at least they're perceived to be negative. We fear them. And fear might not be, oh, I'm fucking scared. It might be like, I avoid this activity, or I'm just so focused on it because I can't live doing anything else. Or I really want to try and fix it. So I'm doing my absolute best to figure it out and fix it. And then there's some frustration around that, then being forlorn or depressed around it. And as you can see, these are the F words of chronic symptoms. And they all start with the one 4-letter F word that I love to say is fear. Okay, all right. Let's kind of talk a little bit about this, right? When we fear something, we do all of these things to try and get rid of it or to try and understand it. And probably part of the problem, if not the biggest problem, is that the symptoms are not necessarily understood. Why are they there? Why are they lingering? Why don't they go away? When the initial injury or infection or illness or whatever has healed, why are they still here? What's going on? And then we do so much investigating, right? We want to figure it all out. We want to have all the tests. We want to have all of the scans, all of the doctor's visits, all the specialists, everything to really hone in on what's going on. But what I've come to learn through my career and this process is that process, first of all, it isn't amazingly helpful, but it also keeps the symptoms coming around. Now, don't think that what I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't get those scans, that you shouldn't get the doctor's visits, the specialist visits. I'm not going to tell you right here that these are not important, that you're not going to go there. Because if there is something wrong, if there is something that comes out of this that has a very good therapeutic target, then you should go down that path. You should get the medical evaluations. You should get the traditional care. That's absolutely important. I'm a big pro fan of that stuff. Where the problem comes is when it's ambiguous. And it's like, well, I had the scan, I see this problem. It doesn't quite fit the pattern, or, it just seems to be taking forever to heal, years and years and years. And we know the body doesn't take years to heal, right? That doesn't mean the pain or the symptoms that you have aren't real, but it just might not be the body source of what's going on. So, this sense of not being understood, not only personally, but the symptoms, that is one of the big problems. And it makes you wonder if you're the problem, right? You might have even been told, this stuff is all in your head. And let me just squash that shit right now. This is not all in your head. And let me repeat, this is not all in your head. Okay. When we talk nervous system, we are talking physiology. We are talking the body, the way the body interacts with every aspect of our lives, our environment, the signals coming from the body, everything. This is physiology. This is physical. It just might not be the kind of physical that you think it is, right? I've got pain in my back. The problem must be in my back. That is an assumption that we need to break. The pain might feel like it's in your back, and it might be in your back, but that doesn't mean the problem is. And we're going to talk about all of that. Now, the title of this particular podcast, not the episode, but the podcast is NERDS, right? Neuroplasticity and emotional recovery. Those words were selected very carefully by me, of course. Neuroplasticity, our ability to adapt our nervous system in a very concrete way. We know that there are distinct anatomical and physiological functional connectivity brain changes that happen as our brains and nervous systems adapt, whether that's positive or negative. And this is crucial because we know, and what you're going to see as this podcast goes on, is that all symptoms have a nervous system, neural circuit component to them. No symptoms are purely physical in the body. They are always interpreted by the nervous system, and in some cases completely created by the nervous system. And that, again, doesn't make them less real. And it also doesn't make it your fault. Because when we talk the nervous system, this is all automatic, right? It's literally called the autonomic nervous system, which means we don't think about it. We don't think about our breathing. We don't think about our heart rates. We don't think about regulating our digestion. We don't think about that shit because, how could we? How could we possibly, right? How would we even fall asleep? Right? We still have to breathe. We still have to have our hearts going, right? This is all subconscious. This is all below the level of conscious awareness, which means that this isn't your fault. Okay? You're not to blame for your symptoms, but it does mean that we can influence them. It does mean that we can have an impact once we really, truly understand what's going on. So I want to tell you my story. And honestly, I've been doing this work for quite a while now, but it just recently really hit me how connected all of the events of my life kind of led to not only where I am now, but the symptoms that I've had. So let's dive into it. I'm not doing this to be self-gratuitous. I'm not doing this for pity. I'm not doing this for attention. I'm doing this to hopefully have someone see something in my story and in my clients' stories that we end up talking about, and the stories of those practitioners that come in on this podcast that actually resonates with them. And they can go, oh, Okay, something there clicked. And maybe that means that it can actually help them. So let's start. Always start with the story, right? When I do an assessment, whether it's through my coaching or my physiotherapy practice, the assessment piece starts with the story, not the symptoms. The story is more important than the symptoms. I say that a lot, and you'll hear me say it a lot as we go forward. All right, so what is my story? Starts in childhood, just like everybody's story does. Now, I wouldn't necessarily in an assessment start there, but I'm going to start there just because that's chronologically the way that this goes. So, all right, did I have a shitty childhood? No. I didn't go through a lot of, some of the overt traumas that a lot of children did. In fact, up until recently, I probably would have said, yeah, you know what, I have a pretty good childhood. And for the most part, I did. But I had very dichotomous parenting. I had a mother who was loving and caring, and a father who was not. He was physically present some of the time, but when he was emotionally absent. This was a huge problem because what it meant is that I was ignored. My needs were ignored as a kid. When I wanted to talk, when I wanted to connect, present how my day went, I was ignored. And the impact of that time and time again is tantamount to emotional abuse. Now, it's not intentional. I don't blame my father for this. I don't. Because he was also dealing with all the shit that he had to deal with too, through his life, and he was doing the best that he could. But I don't think I ever heard him express affection towards me until way later in life, and it was probably too late at that time. So anyway, back into it. I felt completely unseen, unheard, ignored. I remember times actually going up to him and trying to talk to him and not getting a single response, not even looking at me. Again, not a blame, but this does shape how my nervous system found safety. It didn't find safety in being connected. It found safety in being like, well, what am I doing wrong? I need to start looking out for this because obviously I'm not doing something right. In fact, in the times where there was some sort of interaction, oftentimes it would be me trying to tell a story, trying to say something that was particularly hard at school. And my mom would listen. The relationship that I've had with my mom is absolutely amazing. She's such a kind and loving person. Again, dichotomous completely. But with my father, I would be met with words like dry up. Literally, this is what was said. Dry up, stop complaining. And so I had to stuff everything down. I had to stuff it all down. And one of the things you're going to see through the work that I do is I talk to my clients about up and out. Because if you have emotions, if you have feelings that get stuffed in and down, and you're not bringing them up and out, this fuels sensitivity in the nervous system and creates threat in many, many places, the perception of threat in many, many places. So the conclusion that I drew, which is so common in the clients that I see, is that something must be wrong with me. I'm not doing something right. So, I'd learned to read the room, to manage other people's comfort, to, make myself kind of smaller so that I wasn't the center of attention, and it meant that my needs weren't being met. Now, let's fast forward just a little bit. And at the end stage of this, again, I did feel like I had a good childhood, but there were these issues that are quite common. Now, at the end stage of this, let's just switch gears. Something happened, and it was total accident, but really powerful in my development, and it really shaped my belief in the mind-body connection. And that was, and this was very profound, I learned that I could actively change my heart rate. I would lay in bed, and I was probably around 14 or 15 at this point in time. I would lay in bed, and I could feel my heart, right? I could feel my heart beating in my chest. And I found that if I did some things like holding my breath or slowing it down, that I could actually slow my heart rate down. And there's a sense of pride around that. At 14 and 15, I didn't know I was doing biofeedback, but in essence, that's exactly what I was doing to myself, is I was learning how to do biofeedback on myself. Like crucial, profound, but also crazy, right? And so what I would do is I would practice it. I would practice trying to get my heart rate down, and I would get it down from a resting of, when I was that age, it was maybe around 50 to 60, but I would get it down into the 30s, and I was really proud of that. What I love about that isn't the fact that I did it, it's the fact that I learned what we call now as interoception. I learned about my ability to perceive what's going on inside of me, and to connect with it, and to know that I could actually do something with it. And that really spurred on my love of the mind-body connection. So much so that, I started following people back then. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s. That kind of ages me. Let me cover up and hide a little bit. But we're talking about a time where emotions weren't talked about, mental health wasn't talked about, particularly in guys. But what I would do is I would follow people like Arnold back in the day. He talked about the mind-body connection, the mind-muscle connection. Loved that shit. It was really, really fun for me to kind of think about and learn about all of those things. So what I got the chance to be able to do is to really see that this was something that was actually really interesting to me. So when I got to the point where I started doing my own exercise and training, just like Arnold, is I really learned that interoception. I learned that mind-muscle connection. And to me, that became a crucial part of my development, not only personally, but professionally. Because I've always believed that when we're doing something, the more intentional we can be about it, in a very calm and relaxed way, of course, the better outcomes we get. So I never went through the motions with anything that I did. I never went through the motions. Now, I say that with anything, and I mean not just physical, but this is also academic and everything. And that's part of the people pleasing and the fawning and all of that I had learned as a kid. But anyway, point is I developed this mind-body connection. And in fact, in undergrad, before I was in physiotherapy school, I did a paper in a philosophy of mind course on the mind-body connection. It kind of astounds me to this day that I didn't go into psychology. I kind of had a choice, physio or psychology. I went into physio. And I don't regret it, because there's some things that I love about the profession, but you're also going to hear things that I absolutely hated and hate still probably about the profession. But anyway, the mind-body connection was such a crucial thing for me, so I dove into that. So let's fast forward a little bit. So that's the starting point. That's a bit of my history, right? So I had some positives, had some things that predisposed me potentially to some neuroplasticity as part of my symptoms. All right. As many things happen, as many pain stories happen, there were a couple incidents that happened, and both of them were involved one of the main sports that I played. I played rugby. For those that knew me, I was all in. I played at the club level, the high school level, then eventually the higher level club level, the provincial team, going to nationals and things like that. I also started coaching when I could. I started refereeing. I was involved in basically every aspect. But there were two injuries that I sustained many injuries I sustained in rugby, let's be honest, but two of them that were particularly impactful for me. The first was one where I actually hurt my back. So this was in a provincial match, or I guess it was at a national championship, and I was quite young. I was probably 17, and I played scrum half, so you don't know it. You don't need to know anything about the positions, but I had the ball. The play was stopped, and there's sort of a rule in rugby that, when someone goes to take a free kick, which is kind of like a half penalty thing, that if you kind of approach the area to kick, that it becomes fair game. You become fair game. So we had a play set up where I would grab the ball and I stepped backwards towards the opposite team, and there was an interpretation that, okay, they could rush me. So anyway, long story short, one of these big ass dudes, like real big dudes, he was probably a prop or a number 8 or something like that, ran right at me. And I can remember my rugby buddy, Davey Wilson, just going, give me the ball, right? And I'm like, what? We're not ready. We're not set up. Anyway, the guy hit me and I buckled backwards, right? Lots of pain, but you know what? I pushed through it. And I was like, no, I'm gonna keep going. Turns out that whether this was part of it or not, I developed some chronic back pain. Had the investigations. Turns out I had a spondylolisthesis at L45S1, and kind of in through that area. And what happened is the spondylolisthesis is just like a shift in the vertebrae, not quite a fracture, but almost like a dislocation, but not quite. And I was told that was kind of the source of the pain. And so I had dealt with some pain in my rugby days and kind of on and off and that. And it never really bothered me from a chronic perspective. I did some rehab, got better, and things were good. You'll see later on that became a major part of my story. But at that time, it was not too bad. So that sets the stage for that. Next thing that happened, I was coaching. It was a rugby tournament in a different city, and I was coaching my team. We're just monitoring. We were at the hotel, and some guy jumped out of a vehicle and actually attacked me, slammed my head against the ground, and I got a concussion, right? Like rugby, you get concussions all the time. I wasn't actually playing at the time. It was into the concrete in the hotel parking lot. So this actually changed the trajectory of a lot of things in my life, this concussion. What happened is that my personality changed. And for those that have been through a traumatic brain injury, things do change. Your physicality changes, your ability to cope with stressors changes. I didn't know it at the time, but it's the nervous system changes that actually modulate a lot of these things. There's other things, but that was probably the biggest thing for me. So you combine my childhood history with a concussion that disrupted my nervous system, I started developing severe anxiety. And so I have dealt with anxiety for 25 years, or I did deal with it for 25 years in of my adult life from that point. I probably had some anxiety as a kid, but never to the point that it was really something to worry about, right? Okay, so anxiety started to develop, my personality changed, my ability to think and concentrate changed. At that time, there wasn't any such thing as concussion management or recovery programs. It was like, oh well, I guess your brain will heal, and that's what it did. But did it heal without problems? No, I wouldn't say it did. I'd say that I've been struggling with had been struggling with anxiety and panic disorders and all that ever since. So we've got a couple red flags here. Childhood history, people-pleasing personality, fawning personality, also perfectionism as well that comes along with that. You add on maybe an injury or two. We've now got some nervous system dysregulation. Now, guess what? When I hit my head, over the course of the next little while, what happened to my back pain? My back pain started getting worse. Did that mean that the spondylolisthesis was getting worse? Nope. But my nervous system was producing pain as a symptom of nervous system dysregulation, which is what actually happens with all of this. So we're sort of starting to set up a bit of a picture. Now that pain still was kind of on and off. It would come and go a bit. It wasn't really constant until a bit later on. And what happened later on, after all of the tissue healing, let's fast forward to a marriage that wasn't a good one. It wasn't one that where I felt really heard, where I felt respected. In that case, I felt a lot of aloneness in this marriage. And if you think back to my childhood issues, that sort of being ignored by my father, A, makes sense that I'm kind of drawing attention from someone that's similar, and B, like it makes sense as well that these are going to be things that are going to perpetuate problems, right? So another bit of mental health kind of stuff kind of going on at this time. It obviously echoed all the stuff from childhood. And so I was in school at the time. I'd already finished my physiotherapy degree. I was actually doing my grad program and had just gotten married, getting into the point where, thinking about having kids and that. But because of that feeling of not being heard, what ended up happening is that anxiety got really bad. So the anxiety ramped up. What about the back pain? Well, there's another story to that, and I'm going to tell you that in a sec. But for now, the anxiety was at its worst. I was starting to have panic attacks. I was keeping everything in. And what ended up happening was I actually made 2 attempts on my life. They weren't major attempts. I didn't have to go to the hospital, thankfully. I stopped myself in time from both attempts. But this is something that I've never talked about with my ex-wife at the time, and I didn't talk about the specifics around that. But the level of depression and anxiety and panic, that nervous system dysregulation, was just so crucial as part of this. Again, we're talking about multiple attempts here. Now, I'm saying this plainly. Again, it's not for effect. It's because the shame around it makes it worse. So talking about it can actually help. And this is that up and out that I'm talking about and that you'll hear me talk about across this podcast. So all of this isn't a sign that I was broken, even though that's how I felt. It was a sign that I was caring too much for too long with too little support. And so what did I learn to do to be able to survive? I learned to suppress, to move forward, to manage. And that's what I did going forward. And I was able to make it. And I do thank whatever creator, whatever deity, whatever, higher power you want to believe, I was thanking them for being able to be there at the time. Okay, let's carry on. What's happening at this time? Back pain wasn't too bad. And what you're going to see is sometimes there's an inverse relationship between emotional and physical pain, even though in the end of the day, they're very, very similar. So what happened in the marriage? We got divorced. So this ended up being obviously a very good thing, probably for both of us. What happened at this point in time is my nervous system was so revved up. And of course, with a divorce, things are challenging, right? And financially and emotionally and relationship-wise and everything. But if we think of what happened, is my nervous system went from constant problems into, okay, maybe we've been able to actually relieve some of these problems. And guess what sprung up? It was the back pain. In the early days of the divorce, my back pain was at its worst. It was accompanied by a significant amount of fatigue as well. I had two young kids at the time, and when they were with me, they obviously wanted to play a lot, but I would do a lot of laying on the couch because I was in pain and because I was fatigued, and they wanted to play, and I'd do my best to play with them. But I remember a number of times where they wanted to go play at a playground, and I'd say, no, I can't. I'd take them, they could go play, but they wanted me to join them, and I was both in too much pain, but also too fatigued to be able to join them. And I do feel bad, and I regret that, even though I know that's not my fault. So back pain became a big limiting factor, probably about 5 years of that. Now, did the anxiety go away completely? Not at all. Still had lots of episodes of that. But the pain was constant, and it was fairly debilitating. Thankfully, I got a job, my first job as a professor, and was in a relatively inactive type of position where I didn't have to really exert much on my back, which incidentally is probably half the problem why the pain continued. So I'm going to tell my story about how deadlifts cured my low back pain in probably the next episode. But what I did is I actually started doing more training, because of course I'd done training all my life. So I got back into it, and I started challenging my back, and I actually started doing some deadlifts, and my back started feeling a little bit better. And you know what? To the point that after that 5-year period, a few months of actually getting stronger, and I felt great. Now, the narrative for me was, well, my back got stronger, right? What you're going to see is that I actually don't believe that anymore. I don't believe that my pain went away because I got stronger. I believe it went away because I conquered that fear. I worked through the fear. Okay. And I think that's where it's going to come when we go into future episodes. I'll explain that in a lot more detail. Okay. Point is, I did something that could actually help with my chronic pain. What popped up again? The anxiety, the panic. Things got bad again. Because why? Have I dealt with my emotional issues at this point? Fuck no. I'm still suppressing everything. Partly because I didn't know, right? Not my fault. but partly because we don't talk about that shit. We don't talk about that even at that point in time. So this was kind of like the first lesson of how things could change, but really related to some of this emotional stuff. So the emotional pain came up. So what then did I decide to do? Well, more physical pain. This is the point in my life where I got lots of tattoos. Tattoos, physical pain, kind of helped with that emotional pain. Like crazy how this shit works. It's back and forth and back and seesaw, between them across my life, because I hadn't dealt with any of that repressed shit, any of that stuff that was really bothering me. So this is kind of the epiphany that I had a little while ago on how all this stuff connects. But we do see this a lot, that people that are in purposeful physical pain, that helps numb some of the emotional pain. Doesn't get rid of it. Doesn't actually heal you, but helps numb it at least for a short period of time. That substitution can be actually really important. And it's the same thing that back pain was doing for me, right? It was trying to suppress some of the emotions and the emotional pain. So, not self-criticism. This all makes sense. Not at the time, but it does now. So, keep fast forward, going into my more recent life. We're kind of getting into around where the pandemic's hitting, not quite prior to that, not quite that at the pandemic. What happened was my panic started getting worse and worse and worse. And what I ended up needing to do is I was like, okay, I need to go see a counselor, because at this point in time, we're starting to talk about, the mid 2010s. And it's like, okay, this is a point in time where it's actually acceptable to start seeing counselors and dealing with your mental health and all that. And so I did. Went through some counselors, didn't find anybody I really connected with. Finally found someone. I didn't actually connect with them well, but they introduced me to the concept of mindfulness. And this transformed my entire being, this journey, this starting with learning about mindfulness. I learned about mindfulness. I took, as a client, that 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course with a psychotherapist and counselor in my hometown. And my anxiety all of a sudden is like under control. I feel actually pretty good. And the biggest thing wasn't that this anxiety was, revving through my head. It was manifesting physically. And you'll hear me say this more than once, is that emotions are physiological. They have psychological and behavioral consequences, but the emotions are physiological, okay? You'll hear me say that, and that's likely controversial. I'll probably get comments as like, wow, is that actually true? They are physiological. And if you think about it, you can find a body-related symptom for almost every emotional experience that you have, okay? So this is what I was starting to discover, that when I started working with mindfulness, I was developing this interoception that I first learned when I was in that 14, 15-year-old laying in my bed trying to change my heart rate. I realized that that's exactly what I had just done. So when I went through that course, I changed the way that I addressed breathing, the way that I interpreted my nervous system, and I was able to modulate my heart rate. I was able to change what I know now to be the heart rate variability and increase my heart rate variability. Another physiological marker that can be measured, can be used in clinical practice, and something that had a profound impact on me. I was starting to heal. At this point in time, my chronic back pain had gone. My chronic anxiety had gone. My panic attacks had gone. I was starting to deal with all of this stuff. I got rid of some of the pressure that was coming on. Now, does that mean I've never had pain or anxiety since? Of course I have. I'm human. Everybody does, right? But it wasn't that chronic piece. It wasn't that chronic stuff that kept coming up. So this is kind of the journey. What that led me to is, my PhD is in physiology. So like I said, I love physiology. I love talking about it and how that interacts with all aspects of our life. But I went down a deep dive, and it led me to all of the work that I'm doing right now in terms of the anxiety and the stress and the trauma and the pain and doing all the trainings that I did. So I learned this professionally. And what's super cool that came out of this is not only this is the passion of my life now, I'm sorry, my wife and my kids are my passion for my life. But outside of my wife and my kids and my family and my 3 cats, this is the passion that I have, and I love talking about this shit. It is absolutely fun. It is so cool, and it is grounded in physiology. It is grounded in neuroscience. This is not woo-woo stuff. This is not airy-fairy. This is concrete. This is stuff that works, that legitimately works. So what do we call this, right? Is this just like mind-body connection? What is it? We're not going to call it psychosomatic. Too many bad connotations to that. We call it neuroplastic right now. So neuroplastic symptoms or neuroplastic pain, these sort of things are kind of the most recent in 2026 way of looking at it and the way of describing it. But there's lots of history behind that. Some people, like if you go back to John Sarno in the 80s, he started talking about this as TMS, right? Tension myositis syndrome, right? And so you would get these kind of things, but it's been updated since. And there's lots of neuroscience since obviously that time. What we're talking about is real physical symptoms that are generated by a nervous system under sustained pressure. That is, in essence, what we're dealing with in all of these cases. That's what I was dealing with. This isn't imagination-based. You're not making it up. This is very physical and physiological, but it doesn't mean that the problem is structural. It doesn't mean that it's permanent. The great news about this is that we know through neuroplasticity that the brain and the nervous system will shift. They will change. They will learn. They will unlearn. All of these patterns can change. Okay? So I want to end today just talking a little bit about some of the stuff that I haven't talked about yet that I know has a concrete neuroplastic component to it. Stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know about until you know about this work. Okay, let's talk about one of the most recent ones. I had an anaphylactic reaction. Okay, so anaphylaxis is an allergic type reaction. Here's what happened. My tongue got a little numb and got a little tingly. My lips got tingly, started spreading through my face. My ears got hot. My throat got hot. Then my cheeks got hot. I started puffing up. My ears were getting swollen. You've seen people in movies with bee stings and that. I know there was one where Will Smith just blew up. That's how I felt, right? Totally swollen. My tongue was like swollen. You asked my wife, I was trying to speak and it was blah, 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 right? I couldn't speak. And this was real. I didn't make this up. So you might be asking, well, what did I react to? Fuck all. Nothing. I was, sitting on the toilet, sorry, TMI, and I was worried about something about work. There was something that was going through my mind, and I was kind of just a little worried and stressed a little bit about it. And this symptom came on, and then all of a sudden it's like blown right up, and I'm like, oh my God. Right, I'm watching for the throat constricting, right? I'm like, okay, we may need to go to the hospital here. So I told my wife, and we laid down, and I took some antihistamines, I don't know, just trying to see what would happen. And then it dawned on me, well, what did I react to? Nothing. Did I eat anything? No. I mean, I'd eaten a few hours ago, but nothing that I knew that I had any allergies to or anything like that. I attribute it to the stress of what I was thinking about. So what did I do? I do the work that I will recommend to my clients. I looked at it. I said, what are you telling me? Symptoms tell a story. Symptoms are how the nervous system speaks to you. So I said, what's going on? Why is this happening? Not, oh my God, why? But more in a, tell me what's going on. And it cued me into knowing about that was the stressor. And then I looked at it in another way, in an objective way, in a way that didn't indicate damage. And I said, no, I am not reacting to anything wrong. I worked through the fear, and within an hour, I was back to normal. And I was shaking my head going, oh my God, this is crazy. Real reaction, 100% neuroplastic. Okay? One example. Ankle surgery. So I broke my ankle a number of years ago doing something stupid to try and show off for my kids. And obviously the pain was terrible. I ended up having surgery on it. I was in a boot and whatever. day of the surgery, of course, they had me on all the oxycodones and all of that stuff. I took it once, and I was in massive pain after I took it. I decided, okay, I don't want to take this anymore, so I need to manage this myself. And this is before me knowing any of this about neuroplasticity. This is prior to all of that. But what I said to myself is, okay, I'm not going to worry about this. This was just surgery. They fixed my ankle that was broken, and it's going to get better. So what did I do? I worked through the fear. I WTF'd. And what happened? Virtually no pain through the rehab process. It was incredible. Right? Where I've seen so many people with surgeries that go through these things and it's just pain, right? It taught me a lesson about the way that you approach it. Taught me about neuroplasticity and the importance of that. What else? IBS. I've had IBS throughout this anxiety process throughout my entire life. That IBS has significantly changed. I still get a little symptoms here and there, but that inflammatory bowel stuff went away as I started to work on my emotional shit. I've had 2 bouts of knee pain that I would contribute to some of this stuff. One was when I was particularly stressed at work a number of years ago. I joined a running program, and I was worried that I was getting arthritis in my knees. So what happened? My knees were hurting. Of course, right? So my knees would hurt, and to the point that I actually had to drop out. They were point tender, they were swollen, whatever. Learned about this work. I'm back running. Like, it's not that it was a structural problem. I didn't do anything different in terms of my running program. I hadn't changed anything. Really, it was just my approach to where the pain was coming from and why it was there. When it comes, I look at it, ask what it wants, and I move on, right? With safety, with perceived safety. Next one, last one that I'm going to talk about is for the last number of years, like I've done some training, right? I talked about deadlifts. I actually joined a powerlifting club and I trained and competed as a powerlifter. But as I was going, I would start to notice that I'd get this anterior knee pain on the right. And so it ends up being a bit of a degeneration underneath the patella, underneath the kneecap, which is structural. Right? So I have these issues, and it causes pain, particularly when I'm doing bending under load. So things like squats and going upstairs were quite painful. And being a physical therapist, I was like, okay, well, let's get it stronger, right? So I'm doing all the stuff. I'm doing all the right exercises. I don't believe in the myths around not doing knee extensions. So I was doing knee extensions. I was doing all this stuff, getting stronger, but I hit a plateau. And I couldn't break that plateau for the life of me. It was too painful for me to break a plateau. I wasn't able to squat basically anything more than body weight plus a little bit because of the pain, and stairs were terrible, and I was really only pushing maybe 30-40 pounds in a knee extension with lots of pain. Went down the path, went to the doctors, talked to the orthopedic surgeons. They all said, no, don't do it, which I wasn't really planning on doing it anyway, but I was still kind of frustrated. There's another F word. Frustrated, right? And wanted to fix this, wanted to figure out. Fast forward just a little bit, I started learning about neuroplasticity, and I learned about how we can change the way that we interpret symptoms, even structural symptoms. So what did I do? I applied that to myself. I went through a program of knee extension strengthening because I wasn't feeling super confident with my squats yet. Knee extension strengthening with the message that my knee is going to be okay. The pain that I'm feeling isn't causing more damage. It's just a product of the signals coming from my knee, from my kneecap. And so what happened? Well, the pain went down. It didn't completely go away, but it went down. Well, what was I able to do? I was able to progress. I was able to show my knee that I can increase the weight, increase the load, get stronger with the sensations that I'm feeling being relatively benign. They're there, but they're benign. They don't mean anything. They don't mean that I'm doing more damage. So the pain went down. My abilities went up. Am I completely pain-free? No, I still get sensations every time I do some knee bending and stuff, but it's not negative sensations like, oh, there it is again. Okay, cool, I'm good. And then I increase the load and I get stronger and away we go. Right? Off to the fucking races, as they say. So some examples. I've been through this shit. I've learned it all. No, that doesn't mean I've learned everything. I am a work in progress. I am learning. I am listening to all the podcasts. I am reading all the books. I'm doing all the certifications. I'm doing my best to really understand all of this, and I'm partway there. I don't know how far I still have to go, but I know I've got a lot of learning. But what I'm really pumped about doing is sharing what I already know with you, sharing it with my guests, having my guests share their experiences, and helping all of us to understand where symptoms come from and the fact that we can do something about it. We don't have to live with the fear of the sensations and the pain and the symptoms that we get. There's always something that we can do about it, all right? So a lot of people are on this path, but they don't have a map. I want to help provide this map for people. So that's what we're going to do, right? I have some frameworks, some tools, obviously the lived experience. We're going to work through this together. We're going to find the answers together. That's what this show is about. And I really appreciate you listening to this first one and sticking with me for the first 45 minutes. I promise these are going to be great. We're going to get into a lot of really deep shit that you guys are going to really, really enjoy. So that's all for now, nerds. Just keep being nerdy and let's go have some fun and work through our fear.
Thanks for listening to the Mind, Body, Strength Nerds podcast. I know you found some value in your time here, so please like, comment, and subscribe to help me spread the word about the power of neuroplasticity.